imagine, just for a moment, possessing a terrifying superpower.
Oh, man.
Right. Like the ability to feel deep in your own core the exact moment someone is going to die just by holding their hand.
That's an intense concept.
It really is. It isn't a guess either. It's an absolute instinctual certainty. Now imagine having that power in the muddy, freezing streets of 11th century London, which was a time when doctors believed a blood-stained shirt was like a badge of honor, and demonic interference was an actual legitimate medical diagnosis.
Yeah, a totally different world.
Absolutely. Well, welcome back to DFC Books. We are so incredibly thrilled to have you joining us for another deep dive today. And before we get started, please make sure to jump down into the comment section right now and leave your book requests for any titles you'd like us to tackle in future discussions. We read every single comment, and we build this show around exactly what you want to hear.
It is so wonderful to be here. And the scenario you just described, I mean, that is the perfect entry point into what is truly a sprawling, epic masterpiece of historical fiction.
Yeah.
We are diving into The Physician by Noah Gordon. And this book, it's been a global phenomenon for decades. It's been translated into 32 languages, and it is recognized universally as a modern classic.
And what a journey it is. We are going to follow a man who starts in the disease-ridden gutters of medieval Europe, crosses continents, completely disguises his very identity, and risks the death penalty for breaking the ultimate religious taboos.
Just massive stakes.
Huge stakes. And he doesn't do this for wealth. He doesn't do it to conquer a kingdom. He does it simply because he is desperate to learn how to truly heal the human body.
Exactly. It's a quest for scientific truth in an era where knowledge was heavily guarded, intensely religious, and often incredibly dangerous to pursue. It bridges the massive gap between the dark ages of Europe and the really dazzling intellectual heights of the Islamic Golden Age in Persia.
So let's set our coordinates for you guys listening. It is the year 1021 AD. We are in London. And to call this a dark time, honestly, it doesn't even capture the grim reality of it.
No, not at all.
The sources paint this really vivid picture. Like the previous autumn, harvests were completely blighted by hard frosts. Rivers literally froze solid. There were terrible rains, and high tides were tearing away the wooden bridges on the Thames. People are freezing, they are starving, and there are actual whispers that the devil himself is walking in the woods.
Yeah, you really have to put yourself in the 11th century mindset. Cause and effect were not linked to science. When the earth quakes or crops fail or a comet appears in the sky, the people of that era believed it meant Christ and his saints were sleeping.
Wow.
Right? They thought they were placing a massive burden on God that year. The world was governed entirely by divine punishment, superstition, and just an absolute lack of control over the natural world.
So right in the middle of this freezing mud and misery, we meet our protagonist, Rob J. Cole. He's a 9-year-old boy born into severe poverty, and he possesses that terrifying gift I mentioned earlier.
The healer's sensitivity.
Yes, the book refers to it as a healer's sensitivity. If he holds a sick person's hand, he feels this undeniable physical knowing that they were going to die.
And it's crucial to understand how this manifests, I think. It isn't a logical deduction based on, observing symptoms. It's an instinctual alarm bell. The sources describe it as this absolute certainty that drops into his stomach and radiates through him. It is a physical burden as much as a psychological one.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit, because we really need to spend some time on Rob's parents. They create the crucible that forms his entire life. His mother is Agnes Cole, and she is such a fascinating, tragic figure.
She really is. Agnes represents the trapped potential of women in this era. She is the daughter of a yeoman farmer named Walter Kemp. And her father had ambitions for her, so he sent her to a nunnery school, hoping an education would secure her marriage to a wealthy landowner.
Right.
So the nuns taught her to read a bit of Latin, but more importantly, they taught her to produce something called orphrey.
That's the high-end embroidery, right?
Yes, fine embroidery that was so incredibly elegant and detailed that it was highly sought after across the Channel in France. Over there, it was simply known as English work. It was a serious luxury good.
But Agnes doesn't marry a lord, does she?
No, she falls in love with Nathaniel Cole, a carpenter who came to build a neighbor's barn. And Nathaniel he's a man crushed by the system. He had big dreams of becoming a master carpenter, running his own massive contracting business. But the medieval guild system was ruthless. It was insular, and it just beat him down.
Oh, so sad.
Yeah, by the time the story begins, he is unemployed, deeply depressed, and escaping his failures in something called pigment. which was this cheap, harsh brew of honey and wine.
So because Nathaniel is essentially broken, Agnes is the one keeping the family afloat with her fine embroidery, and this leads to the defining tragedy of Rob's life. Like, the most important event of the book's first chapter unfolds precisely because of this desperate situation.
Heartbreak.
It really is. Agnes is heavily pregnant with her 8th child, yet she has to walk through the crowded, filthy streets of London just to deliver her embroidery so she can buy meal for her starving children.
And the sensory details the sources provide here are just astounding. You can practically smell the scene as you read it.
Yes. She's walking past the docks and she smells the garlic on unwashed stevedore slaves, the metallic, biting stink of pig iron, the tarred rope.
It's a complete sensory overload of early urban squalor.
Yeah.
And the physical toll on a malnourished, heavily pregnant woman, it is simply too much.
Right there, on the cobblestones near Puddle Dock, she goes into a horrific premature labor. The circumstances are just brutal. She's carried into a filthy stable, and she ends up dying in agonizing childbirth right there on the floor.
Which was the terrifying reality of maternal mortality in the 11th century. There is absolutely no hygiene, no concept of germ theory whatsoever, no medical intervention available to someone of her class. There's just a crowd of onlookers, filthy straw, and ultimate tragedy. The loss of his mother totally shatters young Rob.
But the universe isn't done with him, is it?
Not at all.
Almost immediately after Agnes dies, a second, equally devastating blow falls. Nathaniel, the father, falls ill. He develops a condition they called quinsy. Today, we would probably diagnose this as a severe streptococcal throat infection, or maybe a peritonsiller abscess. His throat swells shut. He's burning with fever.
And here is where we are introduced to the terrifying state of professional medicine in Europe. The Carpenters Guild chips in to pay for a physician to treat Nathaniel. They summon a man named Ferreton.
Let's talk about Ferreton, because if you want to understand why Rob risks his life to travel to Persia later, you have to look at this guy. Ferreton is the exact opposite of a healer. He is wealthy, he is arrogant, and his methods are basically licensed murder.
Ferreton is the absolute embodiment of the medieval medical elite. He arrives in beautifully cut clothes, but his quilted tunic is purposefully encrusted with dried blood, pus, and vomit.
Okay, stop right there. He wears a biohazard suit as a badge of honor. It's like a twisted billboard.
It was a status symbol. To the 11th century mind, a clean physician was an inexperienced physician. The stains proved he was busy, that he dealt with the messy, vital fluids of the body. Ferreton operates entirely on the Galenic theory of the four humors.
Let's really dig into that, because I think a lot of people listening have heard of humors, but maybe don't understand the bizarre logic behind it. Why did this guy look at a starving man with a swollen throat and decide, you know what he needs? To lose a lot of blood.
It's wild, but it traces back to ancient Greek medicine, specifically Galen and Hippocrates. They believed the human body, much like the universe, was made of 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water.
Okay.
And inside the body, these elements corresponded to 4 fluids, or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was defined purely as a perfect balance of these 4 humors.
So illness wasn't an invader, like a virus or bacteria. Illness was an internal imbalance.
Precisely. If you had a fever or a red, swollen throat like Nathaniel, the logic dictated that you had an excess of the hot, wet humor, which is blood. Your body had too much blood, and it was causing the heat and swelling. Therefore, the only logical scientific cure, according to their texts, was to artificially remove the excess blood and restore balance.
It sounds vaguely logical if you know absolutely nothing about the circulatory system. So Ferreton ties a tourniquet around Nathaniel's arm. He opens a vein, and he drains a massive, copious amount of blood from a man who was already starving, grieving, and fighting a massive infection.
And when Nathaniel doesn't immediately improve, Ferreton bleeds him again. He bleeds the remaining life right out of him. He leaves a useless little packet of charcoal medicine, demands his exorbitant fee from the guild, and just leaves the man to rot.
And Rob, 9 years old, watches all of this. He holds his father's hand. And he feels that terrifying certainty, that absolute physical knowing that his father is going to die. I have to push back on the psychological weight of this. If you could tell someone was going to die just by touching them, but you possess absolutely zero knowledge of how to stop it, wouldn't that completely break your mind?
Oh, definitely.
I mean, it's not a gift, it's a curse. It's the ultimate imposter syndrome mixed with a psychological horror film.
It would be intensely traumatizing. And that trauma is the crucible that forges Rob J. Cole's entire destiny. The deaths of his parents in Chapter 1 aren't just a sad backstory to get the plot moving. They are a blistering structural indictment of European medicine at the time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Ferritin represents a system that values the appearance of knowledge over actual healing. Rob's gift forces him to confront the unvarnished truth of death, but his society offers him zero tools to fight it. That agonizing discrepancy is what fuels his relentless quest for real knowledge.
So Rob is suddenly an orphan. The guild scatters his younger siblings of various households, and Rob is taken in by a traveling entertainer and healer known simply as the Barber. And as Rob grows up on the road with this man, we are introduced to the vast supporting cast that will shape his transcontinental journey. Let's introduce some of these figures because they form the medical hierarchy of the known world.
The Barber is a crucial starting point. He is a fat, colorful, charlatan barber surgeon. To understand his role, you have to look at the rigid class divide in medieval medicine. University-trained physicians, like Ferritin, considered the actual cutting of human flesh to be completely beneath them. It was manual labor. It was dirty.
So they outsource surgery to the guys who cut hair, which to a modern listener is absolutely insane.
It is, but barbers had the razors, and they were used to wielding them. So barbers handled the bloody work that the elite doctors refused to touch, pulling rotting teeth, setting broken bones, amputating crushed limbs, and cutting hair. Yeah. The barber that takes Rob and travels from town to town in a garish wagon, painted with zodiac signs. He juggles to draw a crowd. He sells a completely useless elixir called the Universal Specific. He's a showman, but he also practices very rough, very gritty street medicine.
He's a survivor, and he teaches Rob how to survive. But as Rob grows into a young man, he realizes the barber's knowledge is a dead end. Which brings us to the next tier of healers he encounters, Benjamin Merlin and Isaac Adolescentoli.
Yes, these are Jewish physicians living in England. They represent a completely different, infinitely more advanced tier of medical knowledge. They're the ones who pull back the curtain and show Rob that true academic medicine actually exists in the world, though it is heavily gatekept.
And beyond them, the ultimate goal. Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna. He's the chief of princes. The greatest physician in the world residing in Isfahan, Persia. He's the legend that Rob will risk everything to find.
And once Rob finally reaches Isfahan, he will meet the students who become his brothers in medicine. Karim Haroun, a stunningly handsome, athletic, wealthy Muslim student. Karim is brilliant at the physical surgical aspects of medicine, but struggles terribly with academic philosophy.
Right.
And Mirdan Askari, a deeply moral, brilliant Jewish student who becomes Rob's closest confidant and anchor.
We also have to mention Mary. She is a fiercely independent Scottish woman Rob meets during his long journey east. She becomes his wife, and her intense hatred for the claustrophobia and filth of city life becomes a major narrative tension later in the story.
Every single character in this cast isn't just window dressing. They are avatars for the different ways humanity interacted with healing, religion, and society in the 11th century.
This perfectly sets up the second major phase of Rob's life. He spends his adolescence on the road with the barber, he learns the trade, and the sources detail the kind of medicine they were doing. It's visceral. We're talking about amputating fingers that have turned black from gangrene, yanking out abscessed teeth with crude iron tongs, lancing massive boils.
It's highly practical, but it is entirely unscientific. The barber knows how to perform a few basic procedures through trial and error, but he has absolutely no idea why they work or why they fail.
Right.
If a patient comes to the wagon with internal buboes, perhaps a severe form of stomach cancer or an internal plague, the barber has nothing to offer but a shrug and a bottle of his fake Universal Specific. Rob begins to feel suffocated by this ignorance. He realizes they're just scratching the surface of the human machine.
The real turning point, the moment that changes the trajectory of Rob's life, happens when the wagon is set up in Leicester. They cross paths with Benjamin Merlin. Rob watches this man perform a procedure that, to his medieval eyes, looks like literal magic. Merlin cures a blind man by removing his cataracts. The text calls the procedure couching the eyes.
Couching is one of the most fascinating and oldest surgical procedures in recorded history. It dates back to ancient India and Rome. It requires an immense level of anatomical knowledge and physical dexterity. You take a specialized, incredibly sharp needle, you insert it directly into the sclera, which is the white part of the patient's eye.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and then you physically manipulate the needle to break the suspensory ligaments holding the clouded, opaque lens in place.
Just the thought of it makes my eyes water. I mean, you're poking a needle into a conscious person's eye.
Exactly. Without any modern anesthesia, you dislodge the clouded lens and firmly push it down into the vitreous cavity at the bottom of the eye. Suddenly, light can pass through the pupil again. The patient, who was blind moments before, can see shapes and colors.
That's incredible.
It was incredibly high.
Yeah.
High-risk infection rates must have been staggering, but when it worked, it was miraculous. To someone like Rob, whose medical ceiling was pulling teeth, watching Merlin couch an eye was like watching a man invent fire.
Rob is completely stunned. He chases Merlin down. He begs him, "Where did you learn to do this?" And Merlin opens Rob's eyes to a wider world. He tells him about the great Arab schools in Spain, in Baghdad, and in Persia. He speaks the name of the legendary Ibn Sina. He tells Rob that true medicine isn't learned in a painted wagon. It is studied at universities. But there is a massive, seemingly insurmountable brick wall standing in Rob's way.
Religion. Christians are simply not permitted to study at the Persian academies. The Islamic world at this time was a beacon of science and relative tolerance compared to the brutal factionalism of Europe, but there were still strict boundaries. Muslims and Jews were permitted to study in the academies of the Eastern Caliphate, but a Christian European, they were completely barred.
Rob doesn't immediately give up on staying in his own world, though. Merlin suggests that if Rob wants to learn, he should try to find a real apprenticeship with a master in England first. So Rob travels to seek an audience with Isaac Adler-Santoli, another highly respected Jewish physician practicing in England. The scene that unfolds here perfectly illustrates the societal barriers of the era.
It's a masterclass in historical context. Rob arrives at Adler-Santoli's clinic. He sits in a crowded waiting room for an entire day. He watches a highly organized, efficient academic medical practice at work. It's everything he wants. But when he is finally granted an audience and begs for an apprenticeship, he is flatly, unequivocally rejected.
And Adler-Santoli explains why. It's not out of malice, is it?
No, it's out of necessity. Adler-Santoli explains the deep history of his people. His family has been practicing medicine since they were brought as prisoners to Rome after the fall of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. For 1,000 years, the Jewish diaspora has survived persecution by creating dense, insular networks of survival.
Right, they had to protect themselves.
Exactly. Medical knowledge is passed down within families, from uncle to nephew, father to son. They hold a fragile monopoly on high-level medicine in Europe, and that monopoly protects them from being completely wiped out by hostile Christian kings. They cannot and will not share their hard-won generational knowledge with a random Christian barber surgeon who wanders in off the street.
So Rob realizes he is totally, hopelessly locked out. The Christians in Europe don't possess the knowledge. The Jewish and Arab doctors who do possess the knowledge won't let him in. He has hit a ceiling. So he makes a decision that is honestly hard to fathom. If Christians aren't allowed in the Persian academies, he won't be a Christian anymore. He decides to adopt the persona of a Jew to make the journey east. He chooses the name Jesse Benjamin.
I really want to emphasize the sheer magnitude of this risk. He isn't just forging a passport. He is undertaking a total psychological and physical transformation in an era where discovery means agonizing death. He has to learn Hebrew phonetically. He has to adopt the complex customs, dietary laws, and specific prayers of a deeply religious culture. And most violently, he has to undergo circumcision as an adult.
Modern painkillers. Just
Yeah.
brutal.
Yes. He has to physically alter his body so that he can pass the inevitable physical inspections at the border crossings and in the public baths of the East. And beyond the physical pain, he has to adopt the societal anxieties of a persecuted minority. He is essentially operating as a deep-cover spy without a handler, planning to cross the entire known world.
Before we talk about that journey, let's pause and look at the historical irony here, because it is staggering. We use the term the Dark Ages to describe this period, but the whole world wasn't dark.
Not at all. The term Dark Ages is highly Eurocentric. In the 11th century, Europe was absolutely in a medical and intellectual dark age. The profound knowledge of the ancient Greeks and Romans, the texts of Galen, Hippocrates, Aristotle, had largely been lost to the West, or they were locked away and slowly decaying in isolated Christian monasteries.
But in the East,
In the Islamic world, the lights were blazing. Through the Great Translation movements, in places like Baghdad, Jewish and Arab scholars had meticulously preserved the ancient Greek texts. They translated them into Syriac, then Arabic, then Persian. And they didn't just copy them, they vastly expanded upon them.
Yeah.
They were building hospitals, developing algebra, charting the stars. Places like Cordova in Spain and Isfahan in Persia were glowing centers of rigorous scientific inquiry. Rob is essentially trying to travel through time, moving from a society built on superstition into a society built on science.
in the journey itself is an epic. He crosses Europe, travels down through the Balkans, and navigates the harsh, unforgiving deserts of the Middle East. He survives bandit attacks that wipe out caravans. He survives blistering sheet and the deaths of companions. It takes a year and a half, but finally he arrives in the city of his dreams. He makes it to Isfahan. He makes it to the legendary Meristan, the hospital of the great Ibn Sina.
And this arrival is a complete sensory overload for Rob. After a lifetime of mud, freezing rain, and ignorance, the grand architecture and the sheer concentration of knowledge in Isfahan is almost blinding.
It is the ultimate payoff for his impossible journey. Now, before we dive into the incredible mind-bending events inside the Meristan, I just want to take a quick second to say, if you are enjoying this deep dive so far, please hit that subscribe button. It is the absolute best way to support the show, and it ensures you never miss an episode as we explore the greatest books ever written. Okay, we have arrived in Isfahan. This brings us to a massive structural pillar of the book, centering heavily around Chapter 32.
Chapter 32 is a dense, crucial sequence. The most important event here is that Rob officially begins his clerkship at the hospital. He finally meets the legendary Ibn Sina face-to-face, and then almost immediately, his entire cohort is thrown into the terrifying crucible of a bubonic plague outbreak.
But first, let's just stand in awe of the madrasa, the university, with Rob. He is given a tour by his new friend, Karim Haroun. Karim shows him the examining rooms, the massive lecture halls, the pharmacies smelling of exotic spices. But the crown jewel is the library. Listeners, Karim tells Rob that the university library owns almost 100,000 books.
We have to put that number in perspective to understand Rob's shock. In 11th century Europe, books were copied by hand on animal skin vellum or parchment. It was incredibly laborious. A very wealthy monastery might have possessed a library of 50 or 60 books.
50 compared to 100,000.
Exactly. Sometimes monks would scrape the ink off old Roman texts just to reuse the parchment because it was so rare. But in the Islamic world, they had acquired the secret of papermaking from China centuries earlier. They had entire armies of scribes and translators. To Rob, a library of 100,000 books is unfathomable. It is a monument to human intellect.
And the hospital itself, the Meristan, is a well-oiled machine. This isn't a single doctor bleeding a guy in a dirty room. It's specialized medicine. Students follow master physicians through dedicated wards. There's a ward strictly for eye diseases, a ward for bone setting and surgery, a ward for tumors, and incredibly, a ward for the mentally ill, treating them with music and soothing environments rather than chaining them to walls.
It's a highly structured academic environment, and we see the human element through Rob's interactions with his fellow students. Karim Haroun is this aristocratic, beautiful, incredibly wealthy young Muslim man. He is physically gifted at the mechanical aspects of medicine, like he can set a bone perfectly, but he's deeply arrogant and frankly failing his academic philosophy exams.
Right.
Then you have Myrden Asghari, the Jewish student. Myrden is a steady, devout scholar. He is a deeply moral man who becomes Rob's anchor in this strange new world.
I have to push back on Karim's struggles, though. I look at this curriculum and I am baffled. Karim is in the middle of the greatest hospital on earth, saving lives, doing amputations, and he is on the verge of failing out because he doesn't know philosophy and law. Why on earth did a medieval doctor need to be a lawyer and a philosopher? To a modern mind, that seems entirely counterproductive to actual healing.
It does seem counterproductive to us because modern Western medicine strictly separates the hard sciences from the humanities. But you have to understand the holistic philosophy of Ibn Sina and the medieval Persian worldview. To them, the human being is not just a biological machine of flesh and bone.
Right, they viewed it as a connected system.
Exactly. You cannot truly heal the physical body without understanding the soul that animates it, which requires a deep study of philosophy. And you cannot heal a person without understanding their place in the universe and the rules of the society they live in, which requires theology and law. Ibn Sina tells Rob explicitly that science and medicine teach of the body, while philosophy teaches of the mind and the soul. A physician requires all of these to find the ultimate truth. To the masters in Isfahan, medicine was not considered a mere trade, like being a carpenter or a barber. It was the highest pursuit of divine truth.
That is incredibly lofty, beautiful philosophy, but that high-minded theory is almost immediately dragged through the mud. A devastating outbreak of the bubonic plague hits the region. And this isn't a textbook exercise in a sunny lecture hall. The students are mobilized and sent out into the surrounding countryside to treat the dying.
And this is where the theoretical debates of the classroom meet the horrifying, messy reality of a pandemic. The students are thrust into an absolute nightmare. They are standing among the dead and dying, debating medical history. Galen, the ancient Greek authority, advised physicians to flee a plague, to survive so they could treat people another day.
Makes sense from a survival standpoint.
Right. And the great Arab physician Rhazes essentially gave the same advice: flee quickly and go far away. But Ibn Sina issues a different command. He orders his students to stay, to treat the afflicted, and crucially, to keep meticulous notes for the physicians of the future who will inevitably have to fight the next plague.
It's an incredible demand for scientific rigor in the face of mass death, and Rob doesn't escape it. He catches the plague. The sources describe the agonizing progression of the sickness. He gets the fever, the bone-deep chills, and then the bubo forms, the massively swollen, blackened lymph node in his groin. He experiences these terrible, vivid hallucinations where he sees his dead brother Samuel sitting next to his cot, just waiting for him to cross over.
The pain of a swollen plague bubo is famously agonizing, and the only reason Rob survives is a stroke of brutal physiological luck. The bubo naturally opens and begins to drain the infection.
Murden and Karim find him in this state. They realize the bubo has burst, and Murden immediately leaps into action, applying medical technique. He puts a small cloth wick into the open wound to prevent it from closing over and sealing the infection back inside. It allows it to keep draining.
It's an incredibly tense, deeply bonding moment for the three of them. They survive the horrific wave of the plague together. It cements their brotherhood. Karim realizes he needs Murden and Rob's academic help to pass, and Rob and Murden realize they need Karim's physical courage.
And this trial by fire is also when the great Ibn Sina fully recognizes Rob's potential. He recognizes Rob's healer's gift, that terrifying instinctual certainty about life and death.
Yes, because Ibn Sina possesses a similar intuition. He brings Rob into his inner circle. Ibn Sina tells him that down through the years, across his travels, he has met a rare brotherhood of physicians who share this gut instinct, this absolute internal alarm bell when a patient is simply beyond saving. He sees that fire in Rob. He sees a desperate, pure need to heal that goes beyond ambition.
Which perfectly transitions us into the next phase of his education. We are exploring the events of chapters 46 and 47, which deal with an unanswerable riddle and the gruesome reality of medieval surgery.
Let's start with chapter 46, because it contains a deeply poignant philosophical anchor for the entire story. The most important event is Ibn Sina giving Rob what he called the unanswerable riddle of what makes a true physician. But this profound conversation happens in the shadow of a heartbreaking, tragic reality. Ibn Sina, the chief of princes, the greatest medical mind on the planet with all his 100,000 books, is completely powerless to save his own wife from advanced bone sickness.
The text describes these intimate, quiet dinners between Rob and his master. Rob gets to see behind the curtain of the living legend. He sees Ibn Sina not as a demigod of science, but as an aging, tired man carrying the immense, crushing weight of the world's knowledge. His beloved wife, Reza, has tumors spreading everywhere. She is wasting away in pain. The smell of her illness permeates the house, lingering in the air despite the heavy incense burning in every room.
It's a profoundly humbling moment for Rob.
Yeah.
He has traveled across the world believing that perfect knowledge could conquer any disease. He realizes that all the books in the vast library can't stop these tumors. He asks Ibn Sina, in a moment of vulnerability, what it takes to be truly worthy of being a good physician.
And Ibn Sina replies with a puzzle. He says that to be worthy, a physician must answer an unanswerable riddle. When Rob asks what the question actually is, Ibn Sina just smiles sadly and says, perhaps one day you may discover it. That is part of the riddle.
It functions like a Zen koan. Ibn Sina is trying to teach Rob that true medical wisdom isn't just about memorizing facts or knowing the mechanical answers. It's about knowing what profound, unanswerable questions to ask about life, death, and the limits of human intervention. It's about accepting the burden of failure.
While Rob wrestles with that philosophical puzzle in his soul, his body is put through the ringer in chapter 47. The most important event here is twofold. Rob must pass his grueling oral examination to finally earn the title of full Hakim, a master physician. But before he can even sit for the exam, he has to survive a brutal apprenticeship in the surgical wing.
And he is placed under the command of the strict, terrifying surgical master, Al-Juzjani. Al-Juzjani is a fascinating historical figure in his own right. He wasn't born into the elite academic class. He was once a traveling bone setter, much like the barber, despised by the elite theoretical physicians. But his physical skill was so undeniable that he worked his way up to become Ibn Sina's right-hand man. Al-Juzjani doesn't care about European barber surgeons or fake Jewish identities. He only cares about clinical results, and he works his students to the bone.
The details in the text here are incredibly visceral. We get a deep look at the tools and realities of a medieval surgical ward. Ridley is cleaning the specialized surgical instruments, rounded bisturies for delicate cuts, Curved bisturies, heavy steel scalpels, bone saws, ear curettes, iron drills specifically designed for removing foreign bodies from shattered bone, cauterizing irons to stop bleeding. It is a vast, sophisticated leap from the barber's wooden wagon.
Rob is thrown into the deep end. He is draining abdominal fluids from distended stomachs. He is stripping infected varicose veins from legs. He is assisting in complex amputations. But the darkest part of this training, and the part the sources detail quite heavily because of its historical significance, is the practice of castrations.
This is a really heavy topic. The making of eunuchs was a commonplace, heavily normalized procedure in the Persian Empire.
Yes, it was mandated by the society. Eunuchs were required for guarding the royal harems, but more importantly, they served in high-level administration and the military. Rulers trusted eunuchs because they could not father heirs, meaning they couldn't establish rival dynasties to usurp the throne. Therefore, creating eunuchs was a lucrative, constant job for the surgical wards.
The descriptions of the procedure are horrifying in their mechanical efficiency. The surgeons would take young boys or captured men. They would pull the genitalia forward with the left hand and use a specialized razor-sharp knife in the right hand to remove everything with a single, brutal sweep.
And then, to stop the massive arterial bleeding, they would instantly clap a poultice of boiling hot ashes to the wound. The survival rate was heavily dependent on the skill and speed of the surgeon. If the castration was being done as a judicial punishment rather than to create a servant, the surgeons sometimes skipped the hot ashes entirely and just let the person bleed to death on the table.
We have to sit with the psychological toll this takes on a healer. Rob's entire soul, fueled by the death of his parents, is dedicated to making people whole. He crossed the world to preserve life, yet he is forced by the rules of his host society to mutilate completely healthy men and boys. And it changes him. Myrddin, his closest friend, notices this dark shift in Rob's demeanor. Myrddin tells him, "I think you begin to like cutting too much."
That is perhaps one of the most chilling lines in the book,
Right.
liking cutting too much. It points to a very real, necessary psychological defense mechanism. To be a surgeon, especially in a brutal era without modern anesthesia, you have to cultivate detachment.
You have to separate the person from the meat.
Exactly. If you empathize too much with the screaming, terrified patient under your knife, your hand will shake, you will hesitate, and the patient will die. So you have to detach. You have to focus entirely on the mechanics of the flesh, the geometry of the cut, the puzzle of the anatomy. Myrddin is warning Rob that he is tipping too far into detachment. He is becoming numb to the humanity of the people he is cutting.
And all of this intense physical and psychological pressure culminates in the oral examinations. Rob and his friends have to face a panel of the greatest medical minds in the Persian Empire. Khurram is terrified he's going to fail his philosophy section again. Rob is terrified his foundational ignorance of deep theology will ruin him. It reminds me of the pressure of modern medical board exams, but with an insane amount of added existential weight.
The stakes couldn't be higher. If a modern med student fails their boards, they study and retake them in 6 months. If Rob fails his entire transcontinental journey, his painful fake identity, the constant risk of execution for being an imposter, it was all for absolutely nothing.
The tension in the room is immense. The masters ask highly specific, grueling questions. Rob is grilled on complex anatomy, on the subtle diagnostic signs of sweat, on the precise mechanics of splinting compound fractures. And when he finally gets the subtle nod from the terrifying El-Juzjani that he has passed, that he is now officially Hakim Jesse Ben Benjamin, it is the culmination of his life's dream.
He has reached the summit. But reaching the summit only reveals how much higher the sky actually is. Which brings us to the ultimate taboo and the climax of his time in Persia. We're looking at chapters 56 and 61.
The events of chapter 56 are incredibly profound. The most important event is that Rob commits the ultimate religious heresy. He secretly dissects a human corpse to discover the true, hidden anatomy of the human body. This happens right around the time he must bid a final, deeply emotional farewell to his master, Ibn Sina, who is leaving to serve in a war, knowing he will likely not survive.
Let's do a deep dive into this dissection scene because it is the ideological peak of the novel and a turning point in medical history. Ibn Sina explicitly teaches Rob that Jews, Christians, and Muslims all strictly forbid the dissection of human corpses.
Why? I mean, if they were so advanced in astronomy and mathematics, why was the human body off limits?
Because of the deeply held dogma regarding Judgment Day. Across all the Abrahamic faiths at that time, there's a literal belief in bodily resurrection. At the end days, God would raise the dead from their graves. If a physician cuts up a body, removes the organs, and mutilates the flesh, they are destroying that person's chance at the afterlife. The body had to go into the earth whole.
So how did they study anatomy?
Ibn Sina tells Rob that if he wants to understand the internal structure of a human, he must dissect a pig. Because Galen, the ancient Greek authority, wrote centuries ago that a pig's internal organs are virtually identical to a human's.
But wait, did Galen actually dissect humans?
No, Galen lived in ancient Rome, and Roman cultural and religious taboos also heavily restricted human dissection. Galen relied on dissecting Barbary macaques and pigs and simply extrapolated that human anatomy was the same. And for 1,000 years, the entire medical world took his word as infallible gospel.
But Rob, armed with his new analytical mindset, isn't satisfied with ancient dogma. He dissects the pig, as instructed. And as he looks at the organs, his clinical experience tells him things don't make sense. He is driven by this pure, burning need to heal. He realizes he cannot fix a complex abdominal distemper if he doesn't actually know what the inside of a human abdomen looks like.
So he crosses the point of no return. In the dead of night, he sneaks into the charnel house, which was the holding place for the dead. He finds the body of a young woman named Melia who had just recently died.
The bravery here is just astounding. If the guards catch him with a scalpel over a human corpse, he won't just be expelled from the university. He will be tortured and executed for heresy and desecration.
But the text notes his internal monologue. He isn't driven by witchery or dark magic or morbid curiosity. He truly believes he is doing this to protect God's finest creation. He believes that a loving God would not frown on a physician trying to learn how to save human lives. He opens her chest and abdomen.
And what does he find?
He discovers that the ancient, infallible Galen was completely wrong. The pig does not have the exact same internal structure as a human. Rob examines the shape of the human liver, which doesn't have the distinct 5 lobes of an animal liver. He examines the human uterus, which isn't horned like a pig's to carry litters. He maps the blood vessels.
It is the birth of true, empirical, observational science. He is choosing to look at the undeniable truth with his own eyes, rather than blindly accepting ancient texts.
And paradoxically, this grand discovery isolates him even further. He now possesses a truth that even the great Ibn Sina doesn't have, but he can never tell anyone how he got it. He bids farewell to Ibn Sina shortly after. It is a deeply emotional parting where Rob essentially asks for his true father's blessing.
Because Ibn Sina is the father his soul chose. He filled the void left by Nathaniel's death. But Rob knows his time in Persia has come to an end. The political situation is destabilizing, and his wife, Mary, deeply hates the city. She hates the oppressive heat, the intense culture clash, the claustrophobia. So they pack their lives into saddlebags and make the massively arduous journey back west. And this brings us to Chapter 61 and their return to London.
The most important event of Chapter 61 is the stark, depressing reality check of their homecoming. Rob returns to London as a master physician. He is Hakim Jesse Benjamin, trained by the greatest minds on earth. He hopes to bring the blazing light of the East to the darkness of the West. But London hasn't changed. It is just as dirty, backwards, and ignorant as the day his mother died on the cobblestones. Mary hates it instantly. She complains about the constant booming noise of the 100 church bells, calling the city a black quagmire.
And the medical establishment in London is pathetic. Rob sets up his sign. The local London physicians, who are basically uneducated quacks relying on astrology and bleeding, immediately try to intimidate him. But then a true medical emergency happens down by the docks. A slave is crushed under a massive load of iron pigs, his chest is caved in, and his foot is completely mangled. The owner, a greedy merchant, complains about the cost of a doctor for a mere slave.
This scene is a direct, brilliant parallel to Chapter 1. But Rob is no longer a helpless 9-year-old boy watching Ferreton bleed his father. Rob steps in with the authority of a master. He uses his healer sensitivity and his training to assess the situation instantly. He sees the chest is crushed and the windpipe broken, so he knows that man is beyond saving. But the second slave with the mangled foot can be saved.
The local doctors probably would have just bled the man to balance his humors until he died of shock. But Rob uses his Persian surgical kit. He performs a flawless amputation. He expertly flays the healthy skin back to make a flap. He uses a specialized bone saw to remove the ruined, splintered bone, and then he perfectly sutures the skin flap over the stump to promote clean healing. It is precise, modern surgery in the middle of a medieval dockyard.
And what is the reaction of the crowd? They aren't amazed by the science. The local physicians and merchants are baffled and suspicious. Rob tries to capitalize on the moment to pitch the idea of an Eastern-style hospital to the city leaders. He tells them about the Maristan in Isfahan, places dedicated entirely to healing and understanding illness.
But they just stare at him blankly. They cannot comprehend a society investing money in poor, sick people.
They reject him completely. Rob realizes that London's rigid, filthy, class-obsessed society will never accept a true, university-trained physician, let alone one pushing radical foreign ideas. If he stays, the city will either destroy his soul, or his advanced methods will get him hanged for witchcraft.
So he makes one final move. Honoring Mary's deep desire for the open country, they pack up and move to Kilmarnock, Scotland. It's a completely different world.
It's a retreat from the grand academic centers of the world. But it is not a defeat. They go to a harsh, beautiful land of sheep and shepherds. Rob sets up an examining room in his rural home that is organized exactly like the pristine clinics he ran in Isfahan.
I really love this detail. He uses his incredibly advanced, perfectly crafted, patterned steel surgical scalpels from Persia to gelled sheep for the local Scottish farmers.
Yes, because his advanced surgical technique is incredibly fast and causes the animals far less pain than the brutal traditional methods the farmers were using. He becomes an integral, respected part of their community.
He spends his quiet evenings translating Ibn Sina's massive canon of medicine from Persian into English, ensuring the knowledge won't die with him. He raises his children in the fresh air, and he treats the local Scottish shepherds, the poorest of the poor, with the exact same intense focus and brilliance that he used when treating princes in the grand hospitals of the Persian Shah.
And that is the core takeaway of his entire epic journey. Rugg started as a poor boy shelling peas on a stone stoop in London. He watched the absolute ignorance of his era kill his parents. He traveled to the absolute edge of the known world, shed his religion and his very identity, endured the plague, and mastered surgery just to bring the light of science back to the Dark Ages.
He traded the glory and immense wealth of the Persian court for the quiet, obscure dignity of treating Scottish farmers. He didn't change the whole world. He didn't start a medical revolution in London. But he changed his world. He brought perfect healing to every single patient he touched.
The sources end by noting a beautiful full-circle moment. As the years and seasons slipped by in Scotland, the one thing that remained completely constant was his healer's sensitivity. That terrifying extra sense never abandoned him. When he was called out into a freezing Scottish night to sit by a sickbed, he could still feel their pain deep in his own core. But he never lost that wondering gratitude. He was profoundly grateful that he, a starving barber's boy, was chosen to minister and serve.
Which leaves us with a really profound final thought to mull over. Throughout this entire epic book, Rob's healer sensitivity is viewed almost as a magical gift, a supernatural instinct that sets him apart from other men. But when you really strip it down, perhaps that magic is just extreme empathy. It is the absolute unyielding willingness to truly look at a patient, to hold their hand, and to let yourself feel their terror and their pain. As our own modern medicine becomes more heavily technological, more screen-based, and more emotionally detached to protect the doctors, have we lost that healer sensitivity that made Rob J. Cole so extraordinary?
It's the unanswerable riddle of our time.
It truly is. Well, that is all the time we have for today's journey. Thank you so much to all of you out there for tuning in to DFC Books. We'll see you next time.